Good afternoon, good morning. Thanks to everybody for joining us today. Please let me know who's here, and if you're a teacher, what is it that you teach? So why don't you just put in a greeting into the webinar chat and give me a sense of what it is you teach. Great, so I see chemistry, music, management information systems. All right, so the name of our session is Partnering with Your Students, the Co-Created Classroom. And we're going to be spending some time looking at how do we engage our students. I've been teaching for a long time. And about 10 years ago, I started developing what I'm now calling the Co-Created Classroom. And I'll tell you a story about how this came to be. When I got to my current college, which is Muhlenberg College, by the way, my academic discipline is organizational behavior. I remember having I was going to use a Harvard Business Review case study one day in class. I was new to the school, and surprising to me was as I started to work the case, which included role plays and all kinds of very sophisticated learning, I noticed the students weren't responding at all. And this, of course, concerned me. So I finally asked them, please raise your hand if you've read this case. And only, I think, 2 students in the class raised their hands. So I was at a dilemma point there. What do I do? I've got this whole case study. I've got this involved design, with all kinds of parts the students haven't played. They haven't read the case. What do I do? Can I do cases with these students? So it was kind of a crossroads for me. And so what I did is I said, well, I think we need to have a discussion about this. And I invited the students to actually lead the discussion. And I said, let's decide whether or not we're going to do case studies in this class. Because if we're going to do them, we have to read the case. But if you don't want to do them, we'll do something else. So I sat down and the students kind of looked at me like I was a little crazy. And one of them got up and started leading the discussion as I had asked. And we ended up striking a deal. And they said that in the future, firstly, they really wanted to have case studies because they thought it was high level learning. I reminded them that if they went to Harvard, most of their classes would be case studies if they were getting an MBA, for example. And so they liked this idea of this challenge, but they said, would you please send us an email in advance telling us so that we don't embarrass ourselves by not reading it. So we struck a deal, and the next time we did a case study, everybody had read the case study, and we were able to proceed from there. So to me, that was a lesson saying that don't give up on people. That even if people act in a way that lacks maturity, it doesn't mean they don't have that maturity in them, and that sometimes you need to talk things out and create some ownership. So anyway, our agenda for today is going to be we're going to talk about student engagement. So I just gave you one example of where I wasn't getting the student engagement that I wanted to have, but then was able to get it. So I'm going to be curious about your thoughts on student engagement and where in your teaching do you want to see more of it? In fact, I'm going to, before I go any further, I'm going to put a prompt in the chat. And so I'd like you to answer one or both questions. When are your students most engaged? And how would you like them to be more engaged in the classroom? And then we'll address some of them as time permits. So please go ahead and enter your thoughts into the chat. So second, we're going to talk about collaborating with students as a way of getting engagement. So how can you take the classroom itself and make it something that you can collaborate with students on, where you're equal partners? Third, we're going to get into an even more specific application which is making your students TAs. So creating a role of TA in the classroom and having every single one of your students serve as a TA for at least one classroom session. So as I say, I've been doing this for around 10 years and getting really amazing results. So I'm hoping that some of you are going to try this. I've got some other faculty who are doing it at various schools in different kinds of programs. I think there's a high potential for a lot of different applications of this. Then number 4, we're going to talk about coaching and mentoring your students. So that's both in general, a way to engage with your students. And it's also part of this co-created classroom model where we have student TAs. So how do we coach them to co-teach with us? How do we mentor them to help build their skills and development? 1, so they can do a good job with the co-teaching, but 2, so that they can build their skills. 5, I've got some sample assignments that I use for high engagement. And then finally, number 6, how do we build this sense of partnership and community in the classroom? So our opening speaker talked about, creating engagement, creating community, creating happenings in the classroom. How do we build this sense of partnership? Especially when students don't walk in the class feeling that. Student may walk into the class expecting to be passive. So how is it that we can create that? Okay, so just looking a bit at the chat so far. Somebody says case study discussions, they're least engaged when I'm lecturing. When the topic is relative and has a real world application, that's when they're engaged. When they ask you questions, when there's group involvement, they're engaged. When they participate, if they know each other, okay? And that also, the know each other comment is interesting, because what if they don't know each other, but they learn to know each other in your class? So are there some things that you can do to help your students get to know each other? I think the answer is a definite yes. I'm going to talk about some of the ways that I do that. Students are most engaged when they choose their own topics to study, when it's life relevant. Okay, not going to get to all of them right now, but let's continue. So number 1, the first thing I'm going to propose is make student engagement your first priority. Okay. Firstly, everybody thinks student engagement is good. Nobody's against it. It's like mother's milk. It's something everybody agrees is a good thing. However, prioritizing it means you pick that instead of something else. If you have to cover less material, do you give up student engagement? For example. So there are a lot of forces that lead you away from student engagement and toward the more traditional lecture test model. One of the things that I did was I asked myself the question, what if I privilege student engagement? How would I teach? Some of that came from that feeling of, well, I'm teaching courses, I'm getting good reviews, I'm getting paid, everything looks rosy, except I feel like I'm not accomplishing much. I feel like, am I really making a difference in these student lives? Does it really matter that they've taken this course? So I wanted to have a deeper level of impact. I wanted to, have a lot of the dreams that I'm sure many of you have around what teaching can be. And I felt like, okay, I need to up the ante here, and I need to engage people. All right, so what is student engagement? The heightened simultaneous experience of concentration meaning there's focus, interest, people are actually interested in what you're saying and doing, and enjoyment in the task at hand. Okay, so, and of course the challenge comes when people are taking required courses that they may or may not have chosen to take, And they may be interested in the topic, but they may not know they're interested in the topic or know what their stake in the topic is. And then another interesting fact about student engagement, research shows that it is highest during elementary school. Highest during elementary school. So what's happening during elementary school? People are playing. There's a lot of room for people to pursue their interests. Also, developmentally, people are curious. People are not as much operating out of straight willpower, forcing themselves to do things. So the question is, how do we, when in college level, master's level, how do we up student engagement? Okay, number one, let's put on our group process hat and say, firstly, your class is a group, okay? Tuckman talks about group development. The very first stage of group development is called formation, okay? Now, during formation, some of the things that people care about are, do I want to be part of this? Who else is involved? Is it safe to be here? Can I be myself here? What do I have to do in this environment? Am I going to buy in? Will people accept me? These are the concerns of the formation stage. So on your first day of class, it doesn't matter what subject you're teaching. It doesn't matter what you're actually doing. Those are the concerns that people, or the dilemma that people walk in with. So tip number one, help people immediately make connections with others and to create the expectation of active involvement and participation. Do something that immediately makes people active, and that also immediately gives them a sense of who else is involved, what are possible connections, and also get them active so that they know they're going to be active. That this is not going to be one of those passive experiences. Okay, so I'm going to share with you an exercise that I used last semester that worked beautifully for doing this, in case you want to do this wherever you are. And you could do this no matter what the subject matter is, okay? It's called the four corner exercise. And basically what you do is you pose a question, you create 4 stations around the room, and then students can choose which station they go to, and they talk about your question. Okay. Now you can even do this online too, by using chat rooms, breakout rooms, excuse me. I've done this online as well. So here's a sample. I'm going to give you a few sample questions. You can make up your own. Be creative with them. I tend to have some that are serious and some that are more whimsical, just to kind of get energy flowing. So this was for a class of seniors that I taught. It was a leadership class, but they were all about to graduate. So my 4 corners were: corner 1, how are you feeling about graduating? I'm concerned about decisions. Corner 2, I'm feeling relieved. Corner 3, I'm still deciding. And corner 4, I'm feeling energized. And then I'll simply say, please go to the corner that you want to talk about, or that best fits you right in this moment. I have them go to the corner, introduce yourselves, talk about it, and then I do a debrief. So I'll go around the room and I'll have them summarize some of the highlights. Okay, but this is just for a few minutes. I keep it moving. On to the next one. All right, there's another kind of very more serious one. Which is most important to you and a friend? 1, good listener. 2, that they're artistic. 3, that they're athletic. 4, that they like adventure. And usually a smattering of people go to each. People start to develop commonalities. But make up your own questions. Here's another one. What's your favorite learning mode and why? Again, send them to the different corners. Or what has been your experience working with groups? 1, working with others is fun. 2, I end up doing all the work. There's always a bunch of people who go there. 3, groups are more creative than working alone. And 4, groups distract me. So, and given that we're in the course we're going to be using groups, this ends up becoming great data to use later as we say, how can we make these groups successful? All right, so that's an opening exercise that you can use. I've never, ever had it fail me. It's fun, it's energizing. At the end of that first class period, people already have a sense of who else is in the class. They have a sense of making a few connections. They have a sense that things are going to be active and unpredictable. And that's how I want them to feel after that first session. All right, let me just see if anybody wrote something in the chat that I should address. It's really harder with large classes. Yes. I could imagine instead of 4 corners, it could be 10. Let's see. What if people can feel more than one feeling at a time? Well, people always feel more than one feeling at a time. And they'll always say, hey, I can't pick between them. I'll just say, well, just pick one. Go have the conversation you want to have. Let's see. Everybody needs math. Find a way to apply it to their major. Okay. All right. So let's continue. So there's 3 dimensions of engagement. There's behavioral, cognitive, and emotional. Okay. So emotional is the degree to which they're connecting with classroom activities and whether they believe the activities are relevant. Okay. So, all right, I'm going to move ahead here. All right, you can't talk about engagement without talking about boredom. So state boredom is a negative psychological state in reaction to low arousal, such as dissatisfaction, frustration, or disinterest. Often results in procrastination. So obviously we don't want to bore our students. Here's some of the things that bore students. So we can try to make sure we don't do them and think of more engaging things. Students' perceptions that a given task or piece of work is meaningless. So, give people work that feels important to them. Find a way to make it seem important. When goals are not clear or focused, or there's insufficient direction. When their situation seems restrictive, when there's little control, so you can give people choice, that's going to help them feel more engaged. When tasks are disliked, when things are not exciting or stimulating, or when it doesn't match people's skills or abilities. All right. Okay. So some of the thoughts about collaborating with students. So I mentioned that I want the students to feel like this is our course. So in thinking about how to partner with students, it actually is the course itself that we're partnering on. We all have a common interest in this course. Even if it's a required course, we're going to be spending hours and hours together. We want to get something from it. We want it to be fun. We want it to be engaging. And we want it to be worth our while. So therefore, the idea of partnering to make the course great becomes a great way to collaborate. Okay. So one way that I do this is by making my students TAs. And often people think of TA as teaching assistant. I like to think of it as teaching apprentice. So, if you think about it, a plumber takes on an apprentice with the idea that the apprentice will offer some labor and some value. And in return, they get to replace the plumber. They learn the plumber's skills, or the cook, or whatever it is. So the idea is that whatever your skill set is, the students want to have it. So, and so let's talk a little bit about what's involved. One is to reimagine the classroom where students are not expecting to be spoon-fed by instructors. So Paulo Freire, the Chilean author and activist, talked about the banking concept of education, where it's the teacher's job to make deposits in the students, and that's the only role. And he challenged us to think instead of igniting a fire in our students and making them active and proactive in reshaping society. So, so the idea is to stimulate their growth as leaders. Okay. All right. So, so now in this role as TA, and again, it really doesn't matter the subject matter at this point, you're co-creating the classroom culture. So everybody takes on the challenge. What is the classroom culture we want to have, and how do we make it happen? And then each session in which you will be partnering with one or two of your students. If you have a very large class size, maybe more. So if you have a very small class, maybe you partner with one student. If you have, a medium-sized class, maybe two students. I tend to be using two now. My classes are on the small side. I teach classes like leadership, management, organizational behavior, and a variety of things in kind of the human side of business. But this is applicable to all kinds of disciplines. So students have to consider the development of their peers, because in designing the session, the one or two students and you are going to be partnering. So an important element of this is you do not take yourself out of play. So it's not a delegation. You're not telling the students, okay, you go teach and I'm going to sit in the back and I'm going to evaluate you. You are up front with them, sharing your knowledge, allowing them to lead, but making sure that the quality is high and that you are sharing your expertise. So that's an important distinction here, which is different than a delegation. This is a partnership. So you want them to consider the development of their peers, and whatever the topic is, what is it their peers need to know about this topic? Each session is an intervention into building that culture. Students own the experience in the classroom. It's their classroom. Your job is a mentor and a collaborator, and everybody gets and receives feedback. Okay. Okay. So this is the basic structure of the TA assignment. So I have a variety of topics that I was going to teach anyway. So whatever the topics of your course are, and you're going to have people choose a topic based upon their interest and career goals. Okay. So I often hand out a Google survey, a Google form, where I have various topics. Students get to pick their top choices, and then I arrange the pairings, or if they're working alone, based on their choices. And I also give them some choice to some extent of who they want to work with and who they don't want to work with, which I find makes the whole thing work a little better. So they have to read the assigned readings for that class period way ahead of time. And plus they have to do some external reading, which we decide together what that's going to be. I have roughly 3 meetings with these TA pairs prior to their session. Okay. And I'll talk some about what happens in those meetings and the kind of coaching that you can do to get them ready to do this. And mind you, I'm aware that some people love the stage and they can't wait to get out there and be a TA, and this is their moment. And other people, feel like they're in hell that they have to give a speech. Okay, they have nothing but bad experiences about speeches, and they are scared about it. So you're dealing with students in very different places, and they need different things from you in that process. Okay. Let's see, I'm getting a question. When all students are quiet and do not want to turn their cameras on, what is the best strategy for engagement? Okay. Well, when I did this process online, I'm not currently teaching online, but when I did, I required students to have their cameras on. And if students had a legitimate reason to not have their cameras on, or either they didn't have the technology, or they were sick, or whatever, then I gave them a pass on that. But I created the norm where 95% of the people had their cameras on, and that if you didn't, you needed to explain it. And when I taught online, I had near 100%. So I'm not saying that that's going to happen for you with your student population, but if you create the norm and the sense that it is your responsibility to participate in this process, students do tend to step up, I've found. Okay, so I often have them develop a critical incident case study based upon their own experiences. So storytelling becomes a part of this. I understand if you're teaching math, that's going to be a different kind of thing. Okay, but if you're teaching in the social sciences or in the humanities, then people's experiences can come into play. We develop a set of goals and a preliminary plan. We have 3 meetings together. We facilitate the class together. And at the end of the class, I have all the students fill out a Google form sharing their reactions to the session. And they know that I am then going to meet with the TAs, and we are going to read their comments aloud and talk about them. And those debrief sessions are very, very useful, both in getting a shared view of how it went, working on the skills of the students, and also creating, again, this sense of partnership that even evaluation is part of their role together. They don't grade each other, but they do give feedback. And then I have the students write a paper about the experience that includes using quotes from the feedback. And then finally, there's this executive summary. So, okay, so that's basically the TA assignment. So some of the challenges we have for these, having done this now hundreds and hundreds of times, we have to figure out how to heighten the intensity of engagement for the session. Sometimes that seems relatively simple on how to do it. Other times it takes a lot of creativity to get there. And I'm going to give you some sample ideas that students have come up with. We got to find a way to engage the class in the topic. We got to anticipate the audience and think about their strengths and challenges. So, for example, let's say I'm doing a class on motivation with a couple of TAs. I might ask them, who in our class is really motivated? And they usually know some people. And then I say, well, why are they so motivated? What's going on? Or I might say to them, what's a way that you're motivated or not? So we do an audience analysis. Or then we could say, who's somebody in the class that you would like to motivate? And how is it that you want to motivate them? So you can use this class session to do that. So we try to make it relevant, we try to make it real, and we try to give them a personal stake in it. Okay. All right. So so there's the common stake, there's the interdependence. Okay. So here's an example of we had a TA session on culture. That was the topic. Initially, the ideas were very superficial. They wanted to show some clips from The Office of Michael Scott doing funny but insulting things, which I'm a fan of The Office, but I also know that even though that's going to give everybody a chuckle, it's not necessarily going to provide deep learning. So I start talking to them about culture, and I say, well, tell me about the culture of our own college. I teach at Muhlenberg College in Allentown, Pennsylvania. We're a liberal arts college. And they start describing some of the different main groups on campus. We have a very strong theater department, so there's a lot of theater students. We have a lot of athletes. They have their own culture. We have very strong Greek life. There's a lot of different groups on campus around that. There's different religions, certain religious groups that are, and I asked, so as they started to describe it, I said, well, how does this show up in our classroom? And so they started describing me how people actually sit in the class. And it actually patterned this description of the culture on campus. So they started getting interested in that and started saying, well, let's explore that in the class. Let's actually talk about the culture of our campus and how this is affecting our lives on campus in terms of who we meet and who we don't meet and who we go to parties with and who we don't and who we sit next to in class and who we talk to and who we trust and et cetera, et cetera. And so they designed a session for the class to talk all this through together and to open up about all these things. Now, if I had brought this up in the class, they might have been a little more guarded about it. But since it was peers bringing up this discussion, they were all in. And once they saw it was going to be a good discussion, the class had a really beautiful discussion. And one of the, I'm just going to read a quote in a paper later. One of the student athletes in the class described in detail the ways in which he'd been enculturated onto the football team culture, from being recruited, then initiated, how they ate meals together, worked out together, went out together. He remarked that if he had not been in this particular class and had this experience, he would never really have gotten to know any of the other students in the class, despite seeing them on campus and being in other courses together. He acknowledged that he enjoyed his own subculture, but he was also aware of opportunities lost. And he was greatly appreciative of the chance to get to know other students better. Okay, so I'm seeing some questions. What proportion of the final grade is this assignment worth? Okay, so, and how do I schedule the meetings? Great questions. So the final grade for this assignment would probably be something like 25%. I give students responsibility for setting up the meetings. When I first started, I didn't do that, and it was a headache to have all the meetings set up. So usually as soon as they find out their topics, we get those meetings on the calendar so that they're all set up. Obviously, if we need to change them, we change them. I often do the meetings on Zoom, which is quicker for me. So meetings tend to be about 20 minutes long. So I could do 3 of them in an hour. Depending on how many students you have, you might need to have, instead of pairs, you might have larger groups. You might say, hey, this takes a lot of time. It does, but I'm going to tell you the teaching that goes on in those meetings is fascinating. Also, I'm getting taught too because I'm learning about them. And the amazing thing that happens is that we actually get to know each other. And then when the student has an actual problem or a dilemma, they come to me. And I'm somebody they know. I become a mentor they can trust. And I'll tell you that they didn't used to come to me before I started doing this. And it's not that I got smarter or better looking. Quite the contrary. It's just that we have the relationship, and so they have a track record with me. They trust me because we've partnered together, and therefore I become a trusted mentor, and that carries over. And it really is a beautiful thing. So that's a major byproduct of this. Okay, let's see here. Look at some other questions. You teach a first-year seminar and students are not engaged. You've tried many things. You call names and only a few respond. I need your feedback. Okay. I think this idea of partnering with people on individual sessions in your first year, first semester course is a great idea. Therefore, they will experience each other as leaders, and you will get to know them, and they will share the issue of getting people to talk. Okay, they will come up with solutions and come up with activities. Okay. I find it challenging for non-majors, engaging non-majors. Okay. Okay, can I elaborate on a critical incident case study? Okay, so sometimes the critical incident case study is a published piece, with all kinds of academic background to it. Other times it's, hey, I had an internship at a bank, and this is what happened with my supervisor, and and here's what I tried to do, and I'm still wondering why it didn't work. And let's talk about it. What else could I have done? And then they apply whatever learning we're having to that. Or sometimes it's generating them from students in the class. So basically, it's taking people's lived stories and then making them come to life. So, for example, I had a whole lot of athletes in one class, and I knew anything that was about sports was going to get their attention. And so I had a student who was he was the backup quarterback, and he was expecting to become the starting quarterback, and then they picked a freshman, and he was struggling with how to stay involved in the team, and that became his critical incident case study to talk about, where or it could be from the coach's perspective. How do I involve this person that I wasn't able to make a starter? Okay. All right. Let's talk a little bit about the coaching aspect. You're trying to build a grounded confidence. So now I work as a leadership coach with executives. So I am bringing a lot of background into this, but it's also something that really it's a skill set that most of us have to be able to coach somebody and to build confidence. But you want a grounded confidence. It's not like you can do it, you're the best. It's hey, I see you struggle with that, but we can work on that. And then when you notice progress, you praise it. When they notice progress, they feel amazing. Sometimes fair to good is actually much more significant than good to great. So especially if you can help somebody who has never really commanded a room before to get up in front of their peers and get respect from a room and feel like they succeeded, you have just built that student's confidence. And I'm telling you, I see that 100 times a year happen with students who some who know they can do that, but for some it's really new to build that confidence, and it's life-changing when you see that you can do that. All right, we don't have a lot of time left, so I think what I'm going to do is just see, look in the chat and see if there is another, somebody is saying, yes, sharing personal stories is very beneficial. Okay, talking chip structure, I'll have to look at that. Okay. All right, I've talked about the debrief. I've talked about becoming a mentor. So let's talk a little bit about results, about what happens. So firstly, there's a cycle of support that happens. So TAs get positive feedback and appreciation, trust builds, people see their roles as rewarding, students are willing to take more risks, sessions improve, more positive feedback, okay? So supportive environment happens. There's a cycle of aspiration that happens too. So, some of you have mentioned in the chat, some of your students are coming expecting to be passive, just trying to pass the class. Maybe it's a required class. There's engaging presentations. A high bar is set. Students begin to take the role seriously. They don't want to let other students down. And 2, there's a little competition. 3, it becomes more challenging to stand out. 4, the students feel accountable. They don't want to let the class down. 5, students own the class, it's theirs. And 6, there's a genuine interest in about how to facilitate engagement. So I've seen this happen over and over again. So I'll end with some of the comments from my students, and these are just typical comments from my course evaluations last term. And I'm sharing this not so much to say, hey, I'm a good teacher, but more just that this is the result of partnering with your students. It was meaningful to me to see how much there is to be learned from my peers. The students get a big kick out of learning from each other. The opportunities to have in-class discussions about topics allowed for a greater exchange of ideas and views. People love getting the real views of their peers. It feels like a rare thing to get to them. I appreciate the ability to put our class learning to use in our own way. So putting their own stamp on it. We were all able to learn and grow together. The idea that their skill set is all improving together and they're all seeing each other learn and grow. This inspired me to rethink what I might be capable of in my career. So that's the building confidence aspect. I learned quite a lot from role plays and simulations, which made for better experiences than just taking tests. Okay. Certainly there's a place for tests. We just do too much of it. I was amazed about how you were able to form a connection with each and every student. I always looked forward to coming to class. There was never a boring day. So people experience if you have a connection with every student, not just the 2 or 3 best and the 2 or 3 that struggle the most. If you make a connection to every single student, people notice it and it matters. It was meaningful that we were required to lead a class, pushing us out of our comfort zone. So once people get over some of their resistance to going out of their comfort zone, they really appreciate being pushed a little bit. You show us so much respect and treat us as adults. So students love to be treated as adults and responsible, and they tend to rise to the challenge. The things I learned are things I will take with me for the rest of my life, and I will always remember this class. So obviously that's something we all want to hear. And lastly, I was able to build connection with my peers, which often doesn't happen in other classes. So I hope you're inspired. I hope you feel challenged. I hope you have some fun running with these ideas. If you want some help from me, get in touch. My email is available to you. I'd be glad to correspond with you. I want to support you. And thank you so much for your kind attention. And I look forward to seeing you in future sessions on Course Hero. Thank you so much.